They were willing to give over 1,000 crores without securing themselves. Our former Chief Justice of India had put it very clearly, stating that it's an old boys' club. Men throw parties with liquor flowing. A woman can't call all the men over for a drinks party. The men go office to office seeking vote. These are not things that women do.
If we ask Kannada song to be played, they're not going to do it. It's a management protocol, we can't play it.
There will always be this North Indian, South Indian issue. I think we should get over all of this. And we don't stoop down to that level.
Recently, I read somewhere instead of 7,500 crores, they have recovered 14,000 crores.
Malia could have easily repaid all the employees and we wouldn't be in this condition. I don't know whether he was misled or whether he...
Some lawyers play it safe. Others run straight into the storm. Senior advocate Lakshmi Iyengar, she kicks the hornet's nest and wins. Welcome to Coffee with Counsel. Today, we are diving into three big topics. The high stakes Vijay Mallya case, the real challenges women face in the legal profession, and how the North-South language divide is fueling tensions and sparkling battles over identity and culture across India. These are tough, messy, but important conversations. And no one is better to add them with than someone who has lived them on the front lines. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, ma'am. So first question, ma'am. I got to know that you are into the sports fraternity and you had represented Karnataka in basketball as well as cricket. So from the sports to the courtroom, like it's a two different courtroom altogether. So how was the journey, ma'am? Like how did the transition happen? What inspired you to be a lawyer, especially achieving something huge in fraternity itself is a huge thing.
Sports is in our blood. So my brother and I were out of the house 24 hours. We were never in. We just played whatever we could. And we would even play table tennis on our tiny study table, putting up small little cassettes and play with, we had Lekak books at that time. So we'd tape them up and use them as table tennis rackets and we'd play. So that's how it was. So I joined the basketball club and I played. Then I represented Karnataka. I came to my degree. I was brought into cricket. So then represented Karnataka again. But parents were very clear that we would have to study. So if our photograph was in the newspaper, they would say, we'd rather see it as, a first rank holder or something like that. So both of us, my brother and I, were never cut out for that. But in my high school, I was very clear I wanted to be either a journalist or a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
So I did my BA in journalism along with English literature and psychology and completed my degree in journalism and then took up LLB. So I have both the degrees and then I decided what I would want to do.
So, ma'am, basically, you are being into the field where it actually been kind of like a male dominated. So that is something unique. I mean, we are breaking that stigma, but doing it back around like when you started your career, I guess it was kind of like a huge step for you. So what made you to always be that kind of, like an outlier or something?
I don't think it really crossed my mind that this is a male dominated area. No such thing.
Okay.
This is what I wanted to do and this is what I entered into. And I think there were a lot of women already in there who were doing very well. It was all about finding our way and reaching our destination. But it's been a long journey and every single day for a lawyer is very different from any other work that people might do. It's not monotonous. We have different cases that we deal with every day. So it's been a good journey.
Yeah, ma'am. One of the major case which I handled was recently the Muda case. And where the Honorable Chief Minister of Karnataka was, the High Court gave the direction to prosecute it. And people are confused, including me, because going through the articles, going through the media, and going through the facts of the case. Can you tell us exactly what happened in that case?
Well, there were a couple of complainants who had brought it to the notice of the police and then the courts, of course, that MUDA, that is the Mysore Urban Development Authority, had proceeded to grant certain number of sites to the chief minister's wife,
Okay.
and this was not done the way it was supposed to, and a complaint was given, and since he's a chief minister, you needed the governor's approval, so they had sought for that approval, and the governor has the discretion. If the governor is convinced that there's sufficient material to proceed, then the governor can, and that's what happened in this case. So it went to the High Court. They had challenged the governor's approval.
Okay.
Sanction is used loosely. Normally, sanction comes later. It's approval to start the investigation.
Okay.
So it went to the High Court. The Honorable High Court was of the opinion that the governor's approval was correct. And therefore, we had to go to the special court. That is, there is a special court for MLAs and MPs
Okay.
in our civil court premises.
Okay.
So that's where we had already gone before the court there. And the court had asked us the specific question whether we had the governor's sanction or not. And we were awaiting it at that point of time. By then, they had approached the High Court because the governor's approval was in by then. After we had this order, then we went back to the court. We had to convince the court that a case has been made out. And that is when the Lokayukta was directed to investigate the matter. Now, that order of the Honorable High Court, wherein they found no fault with the governor's decision, that has gone up in appeal and it's pending in the High Court.
Oh.
Meanwhile, some of the complainants had sought for transfer of the case from Lokayukta to CBI.
Yeah.
But the Honorable High Court felt that they had not made out a case at that point of time, that Lokayukta had probably acted in a biased manner. And therefore, the court felt that at that point of time, there was nothing on, at least there was no material to proceed to transfer a case, because the Supreme Court is very clear. You can transfer a matter to the CBI only in exceptional cases. Okay. So this wasn't an exceptional case, and therefore the court did not interfere.
Okay.
But if you look at what has transpired after that, immediately after that judgment came out of the courts, then the Lokayukta seems to have hurriedly filed a B report.
Yeah.
And it was done with just 30 questions posed to the Honorable Chief Minister, and then a B report is filed. So now I guess the complainants would have to decide what next.
Okay.
I think the Enforcement Directorate also had proceeded with an investigation, but at this point of time, it's at a standstill. And the appeal is still pending.
Okay.
But with respect to the MUDA case, it is, I think it's been explained quite well by the High Court also. Only if you own lands and it has been acquired for the purpose of formation of a layout, can you be compensated for the land that the MUDA takes away?
Yes.
You're either compensated in terms of cash or you're offered certain number of sites for that. What happened here was there was a certain person who claimed that he had rights and he did not have those rights because his brother had those rights.
Okay.
He had already given by way of a release deed to his brother. And this person nevertheless decides that he has the right over the property and then goes ahead and sells it to the chief minister's brother-in-law.
Oh.
And then the brother-in-law gives it to the chief minister's wife.
Okay.
And none of them had a flow of a title at all, according to the complainant. So that apart, this person also goes ahead to seek compensation and then says that I'm an agriculturist. That's my only source of income, and you've taken away my only source of livelihood. So I need to be compensated.
Okay.
Whereas this person was not an agriculturist. He worked in the education department here.
Okay.
So he was not entitled to any of that. Next is who's entitled to compensation? The persons whose lands have been taken away.
Yeah.
It wasn't his land at all in the first place. Now that aside, all of a sudden, they go before Yeah, so they ask for, after he sells the property, then they ask for the agricultural land to be converted. The question of conversion doesn't arise at all because all of these sites have already been acquired and they're already converted.
Yes.
So the question of conversion doesn't arise, yet there's an order granting them conversion. Then what they realize is that there is a mistake made. So then they go to the Muda and then they say that you've taken our land, so you have to compensate us. So what the Muda does is that they grant them sites in some prime areas in Mysore.
Oh, okay.
Now, you're not allowed to do that. You can give compensatory sites within the layout that you've formed. But the layout that you've formed is in the outskirts and not valued much. So you're given prime area lands which are worth crores. Now, that's again impermissible.
So basically, the land was there, let's say in Biddi, but the sites were allocated in Sadashivnagar. Kind of
Yeah,
like.
that's kind of the argument that I had. Yeah,
Okay.
something like that. But anyway, the matter is right now in appeal before the High Court. So let's see what happens.
But ma'am, like the usual notion is that we have politicians who are worth thousands of crore together. But this 14 sites, if I'm not wrong, going by the facts of the case, I mean, what I mean, I'm not. I am kind of like unable to digest. Maybe we were in that kind of a scenario where the politician comes in means they have those kind of a power and the money, because the politicians in India, like we are one of the richest politicians across the world. It seems, going by the data and statistics. But these 14 sites, like, I mean, what made it so unique that there was a huge uproar as well regarding this case when it went to the court and they were asking for the resignation of the chief minister. I know you're a lawyer, ma'am, but I want to ask one question personally. That is, honorable chief minister really did it? Like, are they culprit? If there is any one culprit over here, who it should be? Because I was going through the statement and it's been said that the chief minister's statement was such that even when I was chief minister, my wife wanted that site, and I said that I'm a chief minister and I'm not going to sign those documents. But then where did those 14 sites came from? And why, when the other politicians are like crores together worth, but this 14 sites got hold of Chief Minister Siddaramaiah over there?
Now, there can be corruption in terms of money. There could be corruption in terms of in kind too.
Okay.
So this is 14 sites. So you're not talking about suitcases right now. You're talking about 14 sites in prime area. And it's not just that. It's about how the entire system was kind of bent backwards to give you those sites. That's at least the case of the complainant. So, well, you raise corruption. You can't say that the less corrupt has been caught and the more corrupt has been let free. It isn't about that. It's just about how we use our power, or rather misuse it.
Yes.
Anyway, the matter is in the court, so let them decide.
Okay. So recently we were having one more topic, ma'am. Like if you had watched the show of Ranbir Ali, what's his name? Ranveer Halabadia. Like, I mean, we're not going to speak about that topic, what he said and all. Like, but there was one more guy, and they made a comment that, I mean, unfortunately, we wanted to take this topic up. And ಈ ಟಾಪಿಕ್ಕು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಯೂಶಲಿ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಅವ್ರು ಕನ್ನಡ ಬರಲ್ಲ.
ಯಾರು ಬರಲ್ಲ?
The opposite people, like, I mean, the people basically from North India. And ನಾವು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಅವ್ರು ಕನ್ನಡ ಬರಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಾನೆ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಅದು ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. So that's the reason ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ. And the topic is that, ma'am, there's a thing which is going on right now. If there's a fight between in social media or something, they troll that South Indians are educated, sir. Means that's like a tag which has been given by the North and South divided. And for example, in Bangalore itself, if we go for some restaurant, if we go for some kind of like a pub or something, and if we ask Kannada song to be played, they're not going to do it. They won't even give an explanation. They say, sir, management protocol, we can't play it. So what do you think about that, ma'am? Is it a political football which we are caught upon, or else like...
Now, are you speaking about the English, the Hindi language issues that's come up, or are you talking about the North-South divide?
Basically, the North-South has been divided because of the language itself, we see.
So there are two aspects here now, I think, the way you're going about it. one, there will always be this North Indian, South Indian issue. I think we should get over all of this.
Yes.
We should speak ourselves as one country, one Bharat.
Yes.
We'll always have cultural differences. And there are always jokes that are going to be there.
Yeah.
I don't see why we should be getting offended if we are supposed to be more educated, which we are.
Yes.
All right. So there's no need to be offended by
Yeah.
it. If they're going to make jokes about our accent and all of that, that just shows their level. And we don't stoop down to that level. So you just leave it. With respect to Hindi, now the entire uproar is about trying to impose Hindi language and all of that. Now this is not a general show. This is a lawyer's show.
Yeah.
So let's just get it to the legal aspects of it.
Yes.
It started pre-independence time. I think from late 1930s itself, there was always an uproar in Tamil Nadu stating that we do not want imposition of Hindi in our curriculum. So it started from then. At that point of time, I think Rajaji wanted to bring in Hindi as one of the medium of instructions, wherein he felt that there could be English, Tamil, and Hindi in their curriculum.
Okay.
So the Dravidian parties, all of them got together, and there was a huge uproar. So then I think Pandit Nehru, at that point of time, not Pandit Nehru, I think our Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, he brought about the Official Languages Act. And that came about, I think, in the year 1963.
Okay.
This was to ensure that there was no kind of dissidence from the political parties in Tamil Nadu. And he said that English would be the official medium of language. So then it all died down. Later again, it came forth, and I think at one point of time, Indira Gandhi amended the Official Languages Act and brought in Hindi also as one of the official languages. We go back to the discussions that took place during the Constituent Assembly
Parliamentary
and
debate.
all of that.
Yeah.
At that point of time, you had people like Munshi Ji, all of them pro-Hindi. We had people from South like TTK, T.T. Krishnamachari. We had Iyengar, all of them. So they all opposed. Gopal Swami Iyengar was completely against Hindi being imposed. TTK, in fact, was extremely funny in some of his observations where he said, I never wanted to learn English. Shakespeare and Milton was, forced upon us. And now you're trying to force Hindi upon us. I don't think at this point of time I could learn Hindi. So these discussions went on back and forth. That's when we had the Munshi Iyengar formula.
Okay.
That came about in about 1949. So what they decided was, it was kind of a compromise formula. What they decided was that we would not make Hindi the official language. It would not be the national language. We will make it an official language. We won't make it a national language. But we will see to it that steps are taken to ensure that in about 15 years' time or so, English is slowly phased out and we bring in a system where we slowly adopt Hindi.
Okay.
That, I think, did find its way because I know that I have learned Kannada, Hindi and English in school. The reason that, I personally am not great with Hindi and Kannada because English is the easiest language to pick up.
Yes.
So we all pick up English. But if you look at Article 351, what does it tell you? It says that the center, that is the union, must make an effort to implement Hindi. We have to see to it that Hindi is promoted.
Okay.
When the constitutional itself provides for it, I don't think anything wrong is being done
Okay.
in attempting to bring forth Hindi. Reason being, all of us need to be united by a language because we always are fighting. For example, now we have the Marathi, Kannada problem in Belgaum.
Yeah.
I think all of this will take a back seat once we have one common language that unites us.
Okay.
Personally, I'm not in favor of Hindi I get irritated when a lot of North Indians speak only in Hindi in Karnataka. And I always feel that all of us have been, way too accommodative when we speak any language. If somebody speaks in Telugu, we'll speak to them in Telugu. And if somebody doesn't know Kannada, we'll speak to them in Hindi. But that's just our nature.
Yes.
Going beyond that, we have to think, how are the elections conducted? We always go for the majority. So now let's look at all the states in India. How many states speak Kannada? One state. How many states speak Tamil? One state. How many states speak Hindi? It's not just Uttar Pradesh. Of course, Uttar Pradesh has been split up. But it's not just Uttarakhand or Jharkhand or Himachal Pradesh or Bihar or Uttar Pradesh. You bring in a number of states, Hindi is what is spoken the most. So whether we like it or not, I think all of us must decide what's going to be a common language.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If we don't want Hindi, then what? I think we're all very proud of our roots, and Sanskrit is the oldest language.
Yes.
So why not Sanskrit?
Yeah.
But that's opposed to. So you have people in Tamil Nadu who say, we don't want Hindi. And then you say, all right, Sanskrit. Oh no, we don't want Sanskrit, because then they bring in the Aryan Dravidian plot to it.
Yeah.
That's again some anglicized version that's been again thrust down upon us that doesn't exist. If one is going to have a complex, I don't want NEP because I'm not competent enough, I don't want NEET because I'm not competent enough, and I don't think I can learn Hindi, that's not the way to go about it. And the people have been kept in the dark, and quite often I think that they're quite naive. I think they need to come out of that and understand that you could be very proud of Tamil, could be very proud of your own language, and yet learn one common language which needn't be a foreign language.
Okay.
I'm very comfortable with English, but I definitely want my grandchildren in future to have one language of India, of Bharat, to be proud about. Every time I hear the French, they speak in French. I hear the Italians, the Koreans, even their net search, their language, everything is in their own language. We as Indians have only cultivated English. It was convenient for us, yes. There's also a background to it. At that point of time, in fact, it's not just Nehru, even Lal Bahadur Shastri ji, when there was a second rebellion, he again insisted that we will only have English. That was done because there was a huge riot. I think Madurai was burning. So, in fact, every single point of time, you're trying to quell the riots, and therefore you say, all right, we'll continue with English. I also see another twist to it. The Indian National Congress never came back to power in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu. Reason being, Rajaji at that point of time had tried to bring in Hindi. And all the Dravidian parties fought against it, and they came to power. And after that, it's only been them. So what they've realized is, when there is some kind of problem that they're facing in their state, be it the temple issues or anything else, then quickly you bring about something to divert the attention of the public. And then you see that history is repeating itself, where no party has been able to come to power once they've tried to impose Hindi. They think, all right, I think we should start the movement of Periyar again. And that's probably going to win us some elections later. So it's all politicizing the entire game. So we have to look at it from the government's perspective. What is the government trying to do? It's only trying to implement what's provided for in the Constitution.
Okay.
It's the government's duty at this point of time to push Hindi because it's provided for in the Constitution. So if we all don't like Hindi, then we have to accept Sanskrit because that's the oldest language. But even that people don't want to. So there has to be some kind of consensus. And all of this is extremely silly. I think the best thing to do is not watch those shows.
Yeah.
I never knew who this boy was. So I think the best thing to do is stop watching silly shows. Then you're not going to know what this North Indian, South Indian divide is all about. Because we just one country with Bharat all put together.
Yeah. No, actually, I was having kind of like this discussion with my friend. Like, I wanted to figure it out. So he said one thing that, Asha, going by this way, we used to take the pledge. All Indians are my brothers and sisters, and that remained as a pledge. And the last time, going by the history wise, the one time which the entire Bharat got or the India got united was during Ramayana. After Ramayana, every sect, I mean, every steps which the history has came forward has been divide and rule. And right now, I feel personally it's not about opposing Hindi. It's about imposition has been done in such a way that, I mean, not by the government, to be frank. Like the mentality, how the steps have been taken or else how things are going on, feels like, okay, it's been kind of like pushed into our throat or something.
No, it hasn't. It
Okay.
just hasn't.
Okay.
All through, I've learned both Kannada and Hindi. There's been nobody to compel us to learn Hindi. We could always pick Sanskrit instead of Hindi. And I do know that a lot of my classmates picked Sanskrit because you'd get full marks there. So that's how it was. The reason that all of us, especially in Karnataka, are revolting right now is because of the influx of so many North Indians.
Yes.
And that's happened only because the government has allowed Bangalore to explode. And so you have carpenters, you have painters, you have construction workers, you have all of the tech industry. All of them have come in and set up in Bangalore. So you're obviously going to have an influx. And then you can't say that, oh, you know what, don't speak in Hindi. But the point is, you allowed them to come here. You allowed Bangalore to just keep growing. And there's no space left. You've taken over all the lakes. You've built over those lakes.
Yes.
So the problem lies there. So we cannot say that we as Kannadigas, oh, I love the 70s in Karnataka, I love the 80s in Karnataka, and the terrible side to it began from the 90s. But then the problem lies not with those North Indians who came down here. The problem lies with our government, where they've taken no steps to protect our cultural heritage.
Exactly.
And so we can't mix the two. Hindi as a national language, yes or no, it's different from whether we want North Indians to take over Karnataka. I think Goa is facing the same problem right now. Delhi, with its money, bought out most of the houses in Goa during COVID.
Yeah.
And they don't want to leave. But then they've brought in their culture into Goa. And Goa is not used to that kind of culture.
Got it.
So every state needs to find a way to ensure that you don't have an influx which you're not used to.
Smart.
And that's different from Hindi as a national language.
Yes.
Two different things.
I feel like we shouldn't have divided the states according to the language.
No, you should. Because then how do you protect your language?
Yes. But
So even if you have Marathis in Belgaum, you're not stopping Marathis from learning Marathi. So there's no need to say we need to go back to Maharashtra. That doesn't happen. We've had a committee earlier. The committee's decided that's not feasible. They've gone 3 rounds to Supreme Court. It's not worked. So they've got to learn to live with it. Belgaum's part of Karnataka, it remains. But nobody's stopping you from speaking in Marathi. Nobody's stopping you from learning Marathi. But the point is, it's part of Karnataka. That's all. Then the courts have decided. That's the point. People try to rewrite history and lead people to believing something else. When the constitution provides for Hindi, that's what one must accept, whether you like it or not. And this was a compromise formula that was developed by both Munshiji and Iyengar. So you have to accept that.
yes.
So when you have to learn Hindi and figure out a way to face English out over a period of time, I think only if we begin now can we do it in the next 50 to 100 years. Otherwise, it's not possible.
Okay. Maybe like, I mean, going back to that part of history, I was kind of like, for my moot court like a year ago, I was doing a research on based on the federalism and how the Indian federalism is unique than the American federalism. So we are known as the Union of States. And I went for the parliamentary debate where Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has said it. We can't be like the American scenario because in America, the states came together to form a nation. And in India, that didn't happen. Like the states weren't willing to come up as a nation. So we are kind of like withheld by one constitution.
No, I disagree. There were a few states that troubled, especially the Nizam of Hyderabad. I don't think others had an issue
Because of-
about it. We have always been Bharat. That's the precious. If we go back to our ancient texts, you go back to our shlokas, they talk about Kashmir to Kanyakumari, right? They talk about the temples in Kashmir. We've always been known as Bharat. In fact, a large part of our Bharat, in fact, has gone away. So we can't talk about ourselves as a union of states. No, absolutely not. We are one. We had distinct features. Now, if America decided to get rid of they used to call them Red Indians, which was offensive. I think they were the native Indians.
Native.
So you conveniently face them out and then you say, sorry, this is all ours. No, we didn't face anybody out. We ensured that our culture remained. Even now, the tribals in Northeast, the tribals in our islands, they're all still protected. They're allowed to continue their cultural heritage. So each state ensures that they continue to have their own culture. And there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't in any way differentiate ourselves from another state.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Well, I mean, like, I may be wrong. Yes, definitely. I agree with that. But I remember that the Union of States has been set for a reason. And the reason being that when the India was kind of like got the, independence from the British people, we were divided into provisions. And there were provisions, for example, the Goa. Goa was the last state which was kind of like...
That is different. That was the Portuguese held it for a long time, and therefore, to bring them into the mainstream took a while. That's completely different.
Okay. Then, yeah, ma'am. Then, I mean, like, yes, Hindi should be kind of like, we should get that official language because, like, it's been almost 75 years plus and we are still fighting for the languages. But I feel it should be done in, like, at least we have to get together while doing that process or something. Because when you go, if I go for Germany or Italy or France for my higher studies, you can definitely survive over there without learning that language, it seems.
No,
But
absolutely not. To go to Germany, you need to learn A1 and A2 if you need to go there and study.
yes.
So they're very particular about that. You don't need to know the higher level of A3, A4, whatever that is there. You don't need to learn that. But you need to know the basic language if you need to go there and study.
Yes, ma'am. There will be...
So they're very proud of their language.
Yes, that's it. Exactly, ma'am. Coming to the point, like, but there will be a club, it seems. Like, if you are in Germany, any small bit of hobby you have, there will be a club for that. To get included in that club, you should learn German. Because if you don't speak German, like, you'll be, or else you'll be kind of, you can definitely stay over there, you can survive over there. But you won't be able to be the part of that culture. So I feel if we, let's say if I'm going for a trip for Maharashtra or Gujarat, that doesn't mean I have to learn the Marathi or Gujarati over there. But if I'm going over there and if my 3 to 4 generation people are there, yes, obviously we are learning Hindi. And don't you think even people coming from there and staying there from 3 to 4 generation should at least give a try to learn the language, which the local language is there? Like, what's harm in it?
No, we must. That's what we're trying to do with people here, getting them to learn Kannada. But I don't like the offensive approach by certain, these Russian Vedikes and all of that. We know the vested interest over there. That's not the way to get people to learn Kannada.
Exactly. Imposing, like,
So, there
threatening them and
these auto rickshaw drivers very sweetly have learn these words for a day and things like that. In every store, you could put it up stating, this is what you can ask for in Kannada. And I think slowly people will learn Kannada. The reason being earlier, I think in the 90s, all of us were willing to speak in Hindi to accommodate them, and now we aren't. So they automatically will have to learn. That's a different aspect.
Yes.
National language is a national language.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am. I guess you're handling the UB City case.
I used to.
Used to.
That was before I was designated as a senior advocate.
Oh, okay.
So that's when I was the official liquidator for the central government. So both the United Breweries, the Kingfisher, handled all of them for the government on behalf of the official liquidator.
Oh, okay. But recently I read somewhere they have filed a petition stating instead of 7,500 crores, they have recovered 14,000 crores. What do you want to say about that?
They moved the Honorable High Court of Karnataka and notices have been issued. So this is a consortium of banks.
Okay.
all of them were to recover, I think 6,000. It wasn't 6,000. Along with interest, it went on. But yes, I think somewhere there does lie a bit of truth where the banks have recovered much more than they were supposed to recover. But I've seen all the papers, all of it. It all began with Kingfisher borrowing. And then their borrowing continued. 150 crores, 250 crores, 750 crores. All of this was sanctioned by banks without any collateral.
Okay.
So these loans are called corporate loans. You and I don't get a loan for a measly amount unless and until we give collateral, right? But these loans were given by banks without any, they're not secured parties. These banks are not secured. These are all unsecured loans. These are called corporate loans.
Okay.
So they were willing to give over 1,000 crores and more without securing themselves. But what they did was they asked UB, which is a holding company, to ensure that they are willing to stand as surety.
Surety. Okay.
So UB was supposed to stand as the guarantor, and Malia himself gave his personal guarantee, which means that you can attach his personal assets. If you don't recover your loan, you can always sell off his personal assets and recover it. So this is how it began. Kingfisher was in debt. UBHL steps in. Both of them are wound up by the High Court. When they're wound up, that's when the official liquidator steps in.
Okay.
The role of an official liquidator is to see to it that you quickly realize all the assets that the companies hold and bring it onto your fold. And then you ask for all the list of people who are the creditors to these companies so that you figure out a way how you can pay them all back. So the official liquidator has claims from various people besides the statutory debts.
Okay.
The employee debts. That's where I think it's all gone wrong. Malia could have easily repaid all the employees and we wouldn't be in this condition because the banks have recovered their amounts. Now they filed a petition stating, give me your bank statements. I want to see how much you've recovered. All right, you've recovered in excess. You're not going to get it back. It has to come to the official liquidator. In fact, it was a very strange situation that we were in as the official liquidator at that point of time, because we're fighting against, again, a nationalized bank, which is again part of the central government. So, you're having two bodies fighting as against each other.
Oh.
Reason being, we're going by the law. We state that you are not a secured creditor. So you don't have any rights over it. But what the banks did was they didn't come up in the line that they were supposed to along with us before this, the official liquidator. They went to recover their debts by the SARFAESI and the Recovery of Debts due to Banks and Financial Institutions Act.
Mm-hmm.
So they went that route and they recovered.
Oh.
They were, okay, so there's way too much into it. We had a lot of stakeholders, shareholders in the company filing different cases. We had arbitration in the middle. We had to take care of all of this to bring to the notice of the court that ultimately the person standing in the shoes of UB or Kingfisher is the official liquidator. So anything would have to go through them. The other aspect of it all is that when you think that the banks have already recovered, that's not where it ends. One is you've been declared a fugitive economic offender.
Okay, yeah.
And you want relief from our courts. When you have not come back to India and submitted yourself before this court, had you done that years ago, we wouldn't have this problem at all. And the reason the general public don't have any kind of sympathy is not whether the banks have recovered in excess of what they should have. The public is able to see that this person kept employees in both Kingfisher and UBHL continuing to work without any salary for more than 1.5 years. So these people have worked, they've not been paid, they couldn't repay their loans, they couldn't pay their children's educational expenses. Children are sent out from school, bank attaches their home, they don't have cars, they don't have a roof over their head. And to top it all, they sent them notices stating, you have left our company without your resignation letter or without your release, and therefore you've joined another company, and therefore you're due to pay us. And how unfair is that? It's just so unfair.
Yeah.
So, leaving the technical aspects aside, I think if you had just paid all your employees, even one of your yachts or your homes or your expensive things in London, nothing that the Indian system has attached. I'm talking about everything else that you have there, and you've been able to lead a luxurious life there. Had you just parted with a few of those to pay up all your employees, I don't think any of this would have arisen.
Why did Mr. Malia left? I mean, when he had such a huge kind of like assets over here, and he could have
at
easily
that
paid
point
off.
of time, I think
Was he trying to take a loophole?
I don't know whether he was misled or whether I think he just didn't want to be part of the legal system. I have no idea. So when warrants were issued,
Mhm.
normally when warrants are issued against you, the best thing that you think is, okay, let me flee and let me figure it out after I go. And then there's no scope for you to come back. So you've just invited trouble.
Went and he got stuck over there.
Absolutely.
And recently, the Bar Council, Karnataka State Bar Council, the Advocate Association election.
There's an Advocate Association, not Bar
Bar Council. Advocate Association election happened. And you are the petitioner who went to the Supreme Court to get the.
No, I represent
You represent.
a council on
Okay.
behalf of the petitioner.
Okay. So to get the reservation for women in the election.
Women, all right. So the bar elections were due to be conducted. The Advocates Association elections. The Bar Council elections are to come. To take place soon. So we've been writing to the association for quite some time. Some of the women were asking for reservation because it's already there in other places. Some other associations have it. And it's been followed in several other areas, and we expected that to be implemented, but it wasn't. And for some reason or the other, it kept being pushed into, probably for a future term to be looked into, and they weren't taking it seriously.
Okay.
So that's when one of the petitioners filed the petition, and then two other petitioners joined in. And the Honorable High Court of Karnataka felt that they would not be able to step in and give any relief because Supreme Court did it for the Delhi High Court, exercising its powers, but the High Court would not be able to do it, though everybody was in agreement that it must be done.
Okay.
So we had to go to the Supreme Court. I think none of the women wanted the elections postponed.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wanted it to take place the way it was. But since the Supreme Court had granted an interim order to the Delhi Bar, directing them to keep the post of the treasurer exclusively for women.
Oh.
And this is more on a trial basis, because the Supreme Court wants to explore how we could probably make this as something that could be followed in years. So this was more on a trial basis, where the post of the treasurer would be reserved for women. So when that order came about is when I think a lot of these women decided, all right, it's time. So once that order came out, then they moved the High Court, and then Supreme Court then granted this relief. At that point of time, some of the bar, the Advocates Association, some of the members, I think they went to the Supreme Court and explained that, there are a lot of treasurer posts candidates, that is the men who decided that they would be contesting. They would lose out a lot at the last minute. So if some provision could be made. So I think the Honorable Supreme Court was very accommodating. What they said was that, all right, why don't you create the post of vice president? You could have that, wherein all these men who are going to stand for the post of the treasurer can all contest for the post of vice president.
Oh, okay.
So I think that was a huge change that was brought about. And I think we had a record number of women standing. And it was not just that, we had minimum of 3 members, lady members for the High Court. So all these changes were really good. Having said that, it wasn't about seeking reservation for women because we're all lawyers. It's not that women need any kind of specific reservation to, make some gains anywhere. The reason all of this was done was our former Chief Justice of India had put it very clearly, stating that it's an old boys club. The old boys just will not allow a woman to enter. And the system is such that a woman, even if she wants to contest, she can't. Because the prevailing system, unfortunately, is that men throw parties with liquor flowing. They have innovated, the innovation and their modes have changed over a period of time because you have lots of checks and balances in place. So to overcome all of that, they know how to, beat the system and have different ways of contesting.
Okay.
So it's similar to the politicians' elections, and that unfortunately has found its way into our legal system too. So our idea was to change that. We always thought that maybe you bring women in. The thing is that a woman can't call all the men over for a drinks party. It's just not within her to do it. The men go office to office seeking vote. A woman can't go to somebody's office and ask for his vote. These are not things that women do. Therefore, the Honorable Supreme Court was very, very well aware of the difficulties that women face, that even if they want to stand for elections, it's not possible. They don't have the deep pockets, and they can't do the things that men do. And therefore, we thought that maybe you bring women in, it would change the system. And I will have to very, very honestly tell you I'm disappointed, because I heard that there were a lot of gifts being distributed. There was money being distributed even for the post of women treasurer. And that made me really sad. I think that was not what I thought would happen. But I still am optimistic. I feel that this is just the beginning. Maybe you'll slowly have, a change, and women can bring about that change wherein it's a much more honest and transparent way of elections, and we're not going down the path that politicians do.
The major idea of this podcast was to communicate with the students, with the top lawyers like you, ma'am. I have a different question for you, because usually we get a message for the students from the guest, and right now I have a different question for you. You have achieved, trust me, I'm a kind of like a fan of yours. So you have achieved such a huge things. So if there is a student who is coming into the law fraternity, especially a girl who is who doesn't have her father as an advocate or a first generation lawyer, what she should do, and what more than do's, don'ts, what are the don'ts? How to start the career as a litigator, to be there on the High Court?
I'm a first generation lawyer.
Yes, ma'am, that's exactly.
I've not had the money or the background or a godfather to support, but I've had great seniors, and I'm really, truly grateful to them. The initial years are very, very difficult.
Okay.
Whether it's a lawyer, simple. It's not about women lawyers. It's extremely difficult for a lawyer to survive the initial years. You earn very little. Of course, changes are brought in there where you give the interns and the juniors a minimal stipend, which is compulsory. And I'm really happy that's the change that was required, because lawyers would be paid 500 rupees and 1,000 rupees. I know how we've all survived, but we were very honest about it. We lived off our parents for a while. We lived off, after marriage, I lived off my husband for a while. And that doesn't matter, because you know that this profession always gives it back to you after a few years.
Okay.
You just need to hang in there, work really hard, and focus more on learning than on where you're going to get your money from. Whereas your present generation is looking at making immediate money. So a lot of you lawyers, young lawyers, are going to be there in the system by next year. Most of you want to take up corporate because you think it pays better.
Yes, that's the idea.
But corporate's very different from litigation.
Okay.
Litigation is you're always on your feet. You're learning new things. It's a new case every day. It's a different judge every day. It's very different, and there's nothing like litigation. Corporate is ultimately a desk and a chair. But if you do love drafting only and you love doing agreements all the time and all of that, that's the area for you. It pays better. But again, it pays better if you're from the top schools. So you're not going to get picked from any of the ordinary law colleges. That you'd probably get into probably one of these small real estate firms who will tell you, okay, you'll be the head of the legal department and you'll be the only one there.
Yes.
So that's all right to start with. I think I'm just being critical because I prefer litigation.
Yeah. That's
So all I would say is just hang in there. For women, it's not just the legal field, it's always difficult anyway. I'd be honest, there's no glass ceiling. The glass ceiling is 20 mm thickness. You can't break it. And you keep thinking you're going to break it, but believe me, the men have made it so extremely hard, it's not possible. That's just a joke, but you just have to survive in there. Men will be men. The moment you start succeeding, they're going to attribute all kinds of other things to you just to pull you down. You just have to brave your way, stick your neck out. Having said that, for every 3 horrible men, there are 7 extremely good men there. So that's how women have come forth. If you look at even this judgment, where reservation is coming, it's 2 men sitting in the Supreme Court who granted that order. And in times of my trouble when I had to be bailed out, it's the men who stuck. So we don't need to look at it as a man versus woman. But yes, women have it difficult in any field. In the legal field, it's all the more difficult because you don't earn well. So if you're married out of the legal community, it's difficult to explain to an outsider why after 10 years you still don't earn too well. When money comes pouring in later, and you'll be extremely satisfied, the only thing I would want to suggest is never lose your morals and your integrity. Never compromise on that because you will still make a lot of money the right way.
Okay.
You can charge a ridiculous amount as fees and justify it because you're that good and they'll pay you, as opposed to wanting to do deals. And that's something, again, the younger generation seems to want to do. So, and we as lawyers, we always know how to manipulate the system. I don't think we should do any of that. So for the younger girls there, I think you'll do very well. I've seen such talent I cannot explain. The girls are so good in courts. So they just need to hang in there. And after they cross 10 years, they will do extraordinarily well. And maybe one of them would be able to break that 20 mm glass.
I guess you will be the one, Ma. And did you do any moods or something like that when you were in the
No, I never did. At our times, we didn't have all of that.
But I guess you are invited for the judging or something for the
That's
moot court. What are the aspects which you look into the participants when they are representing that moot court scenario or the cases? Like, how do you decide? I know the facts and the law will be there, but is there anything else which
No, we always look at how well the contestant has performed. It's the kind of research that they've done. And it's most importantly, I as a litigator will look at it very differently.
Okay.
I will pose a couple of difficult questions. And I just want to see how well they're able to handle that situation, because it's how well you think on your feet and your court craft. Court craft is really important. How you manage that judge. What is the judge thinking? How do you think I should answer that judge? So all of these things are important. So for the participants in all of these moot courts, we look at that X factor, which is, how well they've managed us. how they could answer us.
That goes for the real life code basis as well, right?
Absolutely. That is why we're looking at that. And I think that's how we judge them. But of course, content is important. How well you researched is important. And what's more important is how well you've been able to counter the other side
Okay.
and handle the difficult questions that have been posed to you.
Got it. So let's go for the one more topic, ma'am. UCC, which the Uttarakhand has already introduced. So what do you say implementing the UCC for the entire state of India? Like entire nation of the country. Yeah, entire country.
I think the faster it's done, the better for us. We will grow as a nation. Politicians unnecessarily try to split and divide us as usual by bringing in religious lines. It has nothing to do with religion. Nobody is going to be forced to follow some other religion. It's all absurd. UCC will bring about a uniformity and equality in terms of what one is entitled to, in terms of personal laws,
Okay.
be it succession, marriage, divorce, all of it. So we will have one uniform law in inheritance or anything, because there are different laws each religion follows. You're not taking away their right by changing these laws and bringing it in one form.
Okay.
Because you had certain sects of Hindus following a certain pattern. You had certain Muslims following a certain pattern in terms of marriage or divorce, and the triple talaq decision that came about, people being upset about it. You'll have to look at it in terms of equality. Then you again bring women into the fold. Do women get, do you want to check whether you're getting those noises in?
No. That's okay.
That's fine. It'll blank it out. Okay. So do women get equal rights? They don't. And how do you bring a level playing field to see to it that women are treated equal? Only by bringing in the UCC. And the faster the states do it, the better. But I think the states are still dependent on vote bank politics, so they're not going to allow it to come. Again, as a lawyer, let's talk. What does Article 44 say?
Yes.
Right? So, Article 44 tells you that states must make an endeavor to implement the UCC.
Yes. And Supreme Court has time and again, like,
They have in so many decisions discussed about the need. So every time the government wants to do something, people are so critical, stating that, they're anti-Muslim and all of that. That's again vote bank politics. How does it affect a Muslim? In fact, so many Muslim women who were on the streets, thanks to their husbands leaving them for somebody else, they have no means of income because they have not been educated.
Yes.
They have children to raise. They don't have money to raise them. Thanks to the triple talaq, so many women have got their rights. Even in terms of inheritance, you don't want Muslim or Christian women left behind with their rights to a certain property, saying that, oh no, the brother gets it and you don't. And the same for Hindus. Again, it's not as if the Hindus got their rights, the women. They had to wait for all of these judgments to bring about a difference. That's why now women are able to claim inheritance.
yes.
So we have to evolve. We have to realize that whatever religious practices we have to differentiate between essential religious practices and what are the day-to-day convenient methods that we have adopted over a period of time just to suit our convenience. So those are things that we have to let go. Hang on to our gods. Pray, nobody's going to stop you. But you cannot say that, don't enforce it on me because my religion says otherwise. Your religion doesn't say otherwise. It came from a point of time where those things were needed. If women covered their heads, be it Muslim women or Hindu women, it was done for a certain purpose. If there was an invasion, you would want to protect them. So you wouldn't want somebody who's an invader to come away and take away a woman because she was better looking or any of those. So in those days, they decided better the women cover themselves up because you would have wars all the time.
Yes.
And with wars, you had the ratio of men is to women was 1:4, because men died in wars and women didn't. And therefore, it was 1:4. And therefore, it was all right for a man to marry more.
Yeah.
It's not all right now. So everything has to be looked upon in terms of which century are we in? When are we going to evolve and move forward? Even the Hindus had certain restrictions, but they were willing to move forward. Sati was something nobody was willing to give up, because the woman herself thought, "Oh no, I have to jump into the fire of my if the husband died."
Yes.
But you had people like Raja Ram Roy. They're all reformists who brought in about this change. So initially, everybody is going to, show some kind of dissidence. All of us must evolve over time and see what is required in the present century. And EOCC is absolutely necessary. It's provided for in the Constitution, and it's about time everybody implements it.
If you want to point out top 3 things which will be changed if the UCC is implemented for the
Yes.
personal laws,
Yes.
which you don't like it at all, which is currently right now over there, what are those 3 things?
I think everything with respect to divorce,
The maintenance,
rights,
the
the
only
maintenance, because a woman could even claim maintenance only through the criminal procedure 125. She still gets to. So all of this has changed. And honestly, the courts have been very smart to step in to overcome these personal laws. For example, in cases where you had children above 5, if they were boys, they could go to the father in a certain religion. And the courts would overcome that by saying the interest of the child is of paramount importance, and your religious beliefs would come in second.
Yeah.
The courts will decide as to who is the rightful, the legal, guardian to the child. So the mother would be the natural guardian and the legal guardian if the court decided. So the courts were able to overcome all of these in various judgments.
Yes.
So we didn't have to rely on laws, but if we bring about the UCC, it would change in terms of not just maintenance or divorce, it would change in terms of inheritance, which is yet a problem in certain religions. So that would change. And it's not just that, it's the thought process of society. We keep thinking that there is a huge divide in view of our religions and that we're growing intolerant. This is a view, this is a word that's used constantly. Believe me, there is no intolerance. It's just that over a period of time, more people are standing up for their rights, which they couldn't earlier. And that's looked at differently. But if you bring in a uniform code, everybody is going to feel equal. So you're not going to be looked at from your religious point of view. Everybody is going to be equal. And the word secular was for some reason inserted into our constitution. Now, when you want to insert that, why won't you want the UCC? Please tell me.
Yes.
Because you want to see to it that everybody is equal in the eye of law. So let's have that. Nobody is taking away your right to go to a temple or a church or a mosque. You continue to do all of that.
Yeah.
Right? So I think UCC is absolutely necessary. I think Uttarakhand has paved the way for the other states to start it. I think it's just a matter of time.
Yes, ma'am. So we are coming to the end of our show, ma'am. So usually for our guests, we bang that one question. And I'm going to throw the same thing for you as well. So if there is one thing which you see while you practice on a daily basis and which you don't like, and given the opportunity, you're definitely going to change that. What is that one thing, ma'am? Like something, like I know it may be the smallest of the small thing, but one thing which you want to change in the how the current situations are like.
I would definitely want to make our legal system a little faster for the litigants.
Okay.
I have several ideas that I feel could be implemented, and maybe speedy disposal of cases would bring about results. That's the thing that I think we've been lagging behind on.
If you can share one thing out of it, like the idea which you have.
If you notice that you weren't in law school at that point of time, earlier we had a system where even for evidence, every question would be put forth by your lawyer and you'd answer it. It would be recorded by the court. and then you would be put to cross-examination.
Yes.
The system changed where our evidence would come in the form of an affidavit. And the evidence would be similar to what you've written in your plaint. It would just come in the form of a sworn statement,
Yes.
right? So the evidence would be filed in the court. That saved at least 3 days. 3 days meaning it saved about, say, 6 months, because each date was given after 2 months each.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so just the plaintiff's evidence, we cut short so much of time by just filing an affidavit of evidence. Then cross-examination came in. If we can bring in a system wherein at the point of the plaint and the written statement is itself by way of evidence, where directly we go to cross-examination. Because there's no need, it's double. I file a plaint, then the defendant files a written statement, then issues a framed, then the plaintiff's evidence, then the plaintiff's cross-examination, then the defendant's evidence, defendant's cross-examination, and then the argument, and then the judgment. So you can't find fault with our courts. It's the system. So at the time of filing the plaint itself, you file it by way of an affidavit. So your plaintiff evidence is done.
Got it.
The defendant, when they file their written statement, you're filing your defense. So you file your evidence statement. Both of you cross-examine each other. Just before that, that issues or framing of issues can be done at that stage after the filing of the plaint.
Okay.
So what happens is that several steps are cut down. I do know that there are certain difficulties in what I'm saying. That's again a very lengthy process to discuss. But to put it very quickly to you, I think we just need to cut short the stages so that becomes more easy, because just by cutting short that stage, we saved over 6 months. We also cut short the stage. We improved on time for the written statement. So earlier you could endlessly take time to file your written statement. Now you can't.
I mean, they
Yeah.
want to do that. Yeah.
So these kind of changes have improved. So if we bring about these changes, it will definitely improve. And with the high courts, again, so many ideas, maybe could split up the roster. Not some judges are overwhelmed with work, some are not. So we could just split that up, ensure that they all have sufficient work.
Okay.
A lot of things, I think, just go on.
Yes, ma'am. So I just wanna we all wanna thank you personally, ma'am, to coming up on our show and out of your busy schedule and just squeezing the time over there. And personally, thanks a lot. I mean, especially for us youngsters, you being in our show and you speaking to us as a friend.
It's my pleasure, and both of you have arm twisted me into coming here, and you didn't give up for over 2 months. I kept buying time like how we do in courts, and ultimately I felt terrible because both of you been exceptional interns.
Yes.
So, of course, I'm extremely critical, and that will continue, but I'm glad I came here. I hope you do get some inspiration from it.
Definitely, ma'am. And even our viewers will be thankful for this. Thanks a lot, ma'am.
My pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.